Welcome back, everyone, to Worlds Beyond with Cam and Ron.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for joining us again this week.
So this week, we've got a big Marvel twofer coming up. We are going to first cover Thor, Love, and Thunder, which just came out. This is its second release weekend, I think, right, Cam?
Mm-hmm.
I heard it actually dropped off precipitously in box office returns. But
yeah, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I was wondering if that was going to happen based on the overall reception, but we'll get into that in a second.
And I guess it's been a little bit symptomatic of a lot of Marvel movies. I think it's not just anything about Marvel. I think it's movies in general. But,
right.
I think there are some specific things. But we'll get into it. So anyway, yeah. So Thor, Love, and Thunder. We saw it last week. We've been kind of anticipating. Well, we've definitely been anticipating it.
Yeah.
We've now seen it. And Cam, I'll let you start.
Well, yeah, I've actually seen it twice. I think you've only gotten to see it once, but I've had plenty of time to think about it, and unfortunately, I've come to the conclusion that I think this is the first Marvel movie that I'm just outright disappointed with, to the point where I don't feel like it's even worth watching again or including in rewatches, partially because this movie feels like it doesn't really do anything to bring the MCU forward, and that's kind of an issue that we've seen in a lot of these more recent MCU releases. I also just think that the script and tone of this movie was just all over the place, and I left kind of feeling like, oh, it wasn't too bad, and there were certain things I liked about it, but the second time around, all the issues were really more apparent, and so I'm interested in seeing what you have to say.
Oh, that's funny because, oftentimes, and has happened with me, with a few Marvel movies, I'm surprised to hear you say that, because oftentimes if I'm thrown a little off, if an MCU film goes in a direction maybe I wasn't expecting it or something like that, you'll see it that first time and be like, huh, and then when you see it the second time, most of the time, with only a couple of exceptions, once my sort of expectations are out of the way and I go back and just watch it with no preconceived notions, and I often enjoy the movies more. So my overall thoughts are similar to yours. It's definitely first Marvel movie that I can say I didn't not like it. I enjoyed it. It was very, as you kind of point out, there's parts of it that I was like, okay, it's here we go, we're getting going. It's kind of getting into its groove, and then parts of it where I was just like, what are we doing? And we won't get into spoilers yet. I thought it kind of pulled it all together in the final act, or maybe not even the final act, but just the actual finale. But overall, yeah, just for a lot of reasons that we'll get into, I was overall disappointed. So I'll just pause there, and we'll say that now we're going to get into deeper thoughts that will contain some spoilers. But yeah, so Cam, where does your list start?
I mean, it's hard to even know where to start. I really did like the first, with some big caveats. I think the first half an hour was pretty good, pretty entertaining. Although right out of the gate, I was a little bit concerned because I feel like that first 30 minutes is almost just the trailer. We saw pretty much everything involving the Guardians in the trailer, and that was pretty much that segment, with maybe a little bit of padding and interaction, but they kind of flew off pretty quickly, which is interesting because I guess Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was originally supposed to come out before this, so I almost wonder if maybe James Gunn had some more plans with Thor in that movie, but since everything got shuffled around with him getting fired and then obviously pandemic and everything, I almost wonder if Taika just needed to get them out of the way as fast as possible. But then after that opening, I think it starts to get really shaky. Everything with New Asgard I thought was kind of I like the direction they went, where it was this tourist trap, but then everything felt like it was more of a parody than an actual logical extension of where they were at the end of Endgame. Especially with the Old Spice gag with Valkyrie was pretty funny, but then she's opening the Infinity Cones ice cream shop, which seems like kind of trivializing such a big event. I
want to jump in on parody just for a minute. So for me, the opening of the movie, I found both shaky and good. Like I said, I love the new Asgard, and the fact that Asgard is starting to become like Asgard with the ships and the magic and
with a big human influence too, which I liked.
right. I thought the setup of Jane's story and the setup of Gore God Butcher's story were kind of just so like thrown in there very quick to give you his motivation and give you her motivation and how she sort of, comes to be another version of Thor.
Right.
I thought it was just so, not really bad, but just so perfunctory. The Guardian scene, some of that stuff, while it was funny with Korg giving sort of a little bit of the backstory and the battle was kind of funny. It was so over the top.
Yeah.
Slapstick and cheesy. And then some of the elements of the repeat of the theater play thing with Matt Damon and Melissa McCarthy playing Ragnarok. When you said the word parody, that's exactly what I said. For the first 45 minutes of the movie, with a few exceptions, I was like, this feels like it's almost making fun of Marvel movies.
Yeah.
It was almost like a parody of an MCU film. Like those guys that do the honest trailers or whatever. No,
right. No, that's actually
had like that kind of a feel to it. So, yeah.
I agree with all that. It's funny, too, because I was kind of expecting the comedy, obviously, with Taika, but it seems like there was a much bigger discrepancy between the serious parts and the funny parts. Like, all of the stuff with Jane, I thought worked. It could have been fleshed out a little bit better, but her kind of how they explained her connection to Mjolnir and how she kind of came to that conclusion was a little bit quick, but I liked it, and I liked the inclusion of the cancer storyline, but it felt just kind of like that was all glossed over very quickly. And the same thing with the Gore intro too. That was glossed over, and then he kind of leaves the story for longer than I had initially thought the first time I watched it, but he's really absent for like the first maybe 45 minutes of the movie.
So when you talk about this, when you talk about the structure of the movie, the one thing I was like, well, why does this not work? Why is this movie feeling so disjointed? And I would say the sort of signature Taika Waititi-ness of the movie in the slapstick comedy and all that over the top stuff, it was way over the top. And I think for that reason some of the jokes didn't hit as well as they did the last time. And I think as I thought back on the movie more, and I was like, and going back, and one of the things I thought was a huge lost opportunity was, especially when Gore came to Asgard and he's now this very kind of like hunting, monstrous, monster almost, and he creates those shadow creatures and everything else. I mean, they had a real opportunity to have that build a lot of atmosphere and have this almost sort of like horror elements built into the movie, and they just would seesaw so back and forth between that and the kids getting abducted, and it's 1 minute it's a scary kid scene, and then the next minute it's a relationship joke between Thor and Jane Foster when they, finally meet each other and she's Thor now, and all that stuff. And what I remembered thinking back on Ragnarok is Ragnarok started out with the Odin stuff and the Odin story, and it introduced Hela, and it was really heavy and scary and whatever. And then we kind of get thrown down the rabbit hole and we go to... God, I can't remember the name of the planet where Jeff Goldblum's...
Oh, yeah, Sakaar.
Well, yeah, when they go to Sakaar. And it's like, then the movie is kind of fun, wacky, crazy, wild, but still exciting and adventurous. And then when they return to Asgard, then it's back to really high stakes, deadly serious. Thor loses an eye, all the Asgardian buddies get killed, and all that stuff happens. And so it went from sort of serious and then took you down the rabbit hole, and then you came out of the rabbit hole and it went back to serious. This movie, like, even within a scene, I felt like it was just like, okay, it's funny, and now it's scary, and now it's funny. I just felt like, and maybe it was because, we know they shot so much more of this movie. I guess, you were saying there's like a 4-hour version of it or whatever. And a lot of people, both Hemsworth and Bale were saying there's a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor that was great. It just seemed like that Waititi didn't balance the lighthearted with the serious as nearly as well in this movie as he did in Ragnarok.
Yeah, no, it's funny you bring up the kind of 4-hour cut, because I wonder how much better an extended version would be. This is really probably one of the shorter MCU releases that we've gotten at I think it's just under like a minute under 2 hours, and so it
Yeah.
really feels truncated. But I wonder how much of that would have actually improved the movie, and how much of it was more just kind of goofiness. What I think the movie really needed was more gore in general. His opening scene was all right, but there was nothing, like I mentioned, there was that whole 40-minute span in between the opening and the attack on Asgard where you don't see him at all. And then the attack on Asgard, it reveals his plan is not to actually directly kill any of the gods, or at least any, like Thor, Mighty Thor, Jane Foster, or Valkyrie, or any of them, but his ultimate evil plan ends up just being kidnapping a bunch of kids. And it's revealed that his goal is to reach eternity, which is this being at the center of the universe that I guess will grant a wish to whoever finds them. And I mean, that brings up a whole new can of worms with like, it's a good thing Thanos didn't know about eternity, but it seems like it's fairly common knowledge because Valkyrie knew about it, Zeus knew about it. And so one of the biggest issues I had with this movie is Gore's plan, and he never really feels like a threat, whereas you were comparing it to Ragnarok, and Hela kind of comes out of nowhere and isn't, like, she's just briefly introduced by Odin at the beginning, but then for the next like 20 minutes is that whole introduction of her like slaughtering all of Asgard and taking over. And then there's that whole like through line in Ragnarok where there's like, you can feel the desperation of the Asgardian refugees trying to like hide from Hela's soldiers, and there's this really great serious dramatic element there that is still, it's in contrast to kind of the goofy adventure elements, but it adds a lot of weight and urgency to that, whereas Love and Thunder had none of that at all.
Right. Well, because they were those two distinct storylines, and they work and they weave them in together very well. You know, they just sort of retain their integrity, where this just felt much more seesawing, and even they tried to bring in Gore into some of the goofy kind of antics and stuff like that. He never got established as a real scary villain, I guess.
Yeah, I what did you think of Christian Bale's performance? I was going to say, I thought he was really good, and I would have liked to see more of him. But it was also kind of uneven, much like the rest of the movie. Like, sometimes he was creepy, sometimes he was more funny. And then I really thought, I actually kind of feel like the movie falls apart towards the end, because, like, you have the whole battle with all the kids, which I thought was kind of funny the first time I saw it, but it doesn't really work the second time. And at the very end, you have Gore kind of has that change of heart, but there's no real reason for it. Like, Thor is just kind of like, oh, don't worry, if you wish her back, I'll take care of her. And Gore's just like, oh yeah, I'll wish my daughter back, and then everything's okay, you know?
Yeah, I thought the way they wrapped it up was definitely too quick for him to have such a big change of heart. But I can see the bargain of, you know, would you rather sort of destroy everything or all the gods, or would you rather have your daughter live a life?
Right. No, I definitely
live the life that got taken away from her. No, I think you hit the nail on the head that there just was not enough gore in this movie to make the story work the way it should have or could have or whatever. And like the big set piece in the middle with the gods, although you know, Russell Crowe was hilarious with his weird Greek accent and all the goofy stuff that went on. But I feel like that seemed to me, having seen, you know, a few movies of Taika Waititi's now and loving them all so far, it felt like he really wanted to get that whole, you know, wherever the hell they were, Mount Olympus set piece in there, which was just, in a way, I don't know how you felt about it seeing it the second time. It was kind of pointless, you know? I mean, it would have been much better time spent, you know, developing Gore than that whole Hercules comedy show.
Yeah, well, I'm really struggling to kind of sum up how I feel about this, but I guess walking out of it, it felt super basic, and it never quite reached that level of, like, epic Marvel feel that I was hoping for. Whereas, as much as I've seen a lot of complaints online about Multiverse of Madness, Black Widow, Eternals, all of those still felt like they were an awesome, epic Marvel film, but this never got there, and I almost left feeling like I even though I didn't dislike it to the extent I disliked that movie, I almost left feeling almost like I left The Last Jedi, because it felt like there was so much effort going into things that just didn't matter, and then all the good stuff was just so basic I couldn't really enjoy it. But the Mount what was it, Omnipotent City stuff, that was,
it was fun.
It was fun, but it was a lot of just like treading water, and then that was really it. There was that scene, and then it felt like the movie was kind of over. Like it when they were going from Omnipotent City to the black and white shadow realm there, I remember thinking like, oh wow, we're already here, it's like already the end of the movie. And then they have kind of this what feels like a final battle, and it was really cool because all the visuals and everything's black and white except for their powers. That was awesome.
Was great.
But then that to me is where the movie kind of trails off at the end. Because they kind of go back to Asgard, and they kind of just like mill about Asgard for a little bit, and it just feels like the end of Obi-Wan in a lot of ways, where people are just jumping back and forth from thing to thing, and then they ultimately just kind of jump right to eternity from New Asgard. So it's kind of like it never felt like the journey was this kind of tough thing when everyone's just jumping around everywhere,
Right, everyone got to just instantaneously teleport wherever they needed to be. Yeah, and then the other thing too is like when they go to the Shadow Realm and they go into Gore's tent and they find all his little maps and books and things that he's been reading to do what he's going to do, it's like you sort of figure out, okay, this is why he kidnapped the children versus killed them, because he thought it would, because he needs Thor's hammer, or
he needs the Bifrost to open the door to eternity.
Exactly. So, and that was kind of like, you could have built that up. Like, we could have seen Gore doing bad stuff on his way to maybe find some of these artifacts that then led him to the conclusion that he needed to get the kids. And then the kidnapping the kids could have happened later and been more big and scary. And then Jane and Valkyrie and Thor had to chase after them. And that, to me, would have made a lot more sense if the plot had sort of worked out. But yeah, it was totally weird where they're like having this big epic kind of final battle. I thought Valkyrie got killed for a minute there.
Right, yeah.
And then they just go back to Asgard and hang out for a little while.
Right. And, that's the movie really slowed down at that point.
And the whole
Oh, go ahead.
So so go ahead.
I was just going to say, every time you say something, I'm reminded of something else, but then you say something and then I'm reminded of another thing, so I keep jumping. When it comes to Gore's build-up, one scene I wanted to touch on was Sif at the beginning, and how that was like such a weird, flippant scene. Like Thor just comes up, he's like, "Oh, this god's dead," and then, Sif is here, and so they go down and they kind of just have this weird, like, off-the-cuff conversation, and then she's out of the movie. But that was kind of emblematic of, I wish we could have actually seen Gore fight Sif and destroy that monster to set up his kind of evilness, I guess. Yeah,
because I was excited actually to see her back, and I knew she wasn't going to have a big part in the movie, but it was kind of like, but you get the impression that there was probably more to that we just didn't see.
Right, yeah.
And then they just they had that, in the wrap-up section, they had that, her training the kids.
Yeah, I'm glad she survived and they didn't just toss her out like the other warriors there. But same with Darcy and Selvig, they kind of just showed up and left. I was kind of hoping they might have had a bigger role, but this movie already had so much else to do that obviously they didn't. But then I was also trying to think, what did you think of Natalie Portman's performance? Because the second time I watched it, I was kind of unimpressed. I feel like she was kind of just phoning it in. And same with Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie. She was like one of my favorite characters in Ragnarok, and it feels like she was just here to be there, and she just like woke up and showed up on set with whatever she was wearing.
That you make a great point, because they keep the commercials keep harping on that scene with the two of them getting ready to leave and like clinking swords, or she clinks her sword with the hammer. Yeah, now that you mention it, Tessa Thompson was just kind of there. They didn't really give her a lot to do, other than just sort of being presidential or kingly, or whatever you want to call it. And kind of the Guardians being in it, I just felt like a lot of that was just like so superfluous. And you thought the Guardians were going to have some bearing on the story. It's almost like I thought the Guardians were going to come back and help them out instead of the little kids becoming
yeah.
mini Thors for 5 minutes.
Well, there's a lot of that. See, that's another thing that you reminded me of. If only, why couldn't Thor have done that like any of the past times to all the Avengers? Why did he just suddenly get this power to give to all the kids when he could have done it to Steve Rogers when they were fighting Thanos? And there just seems to be a lot of like things thrown in just to have something to do or to work towards or whatever else, you know?
I did really think the end, for me at least, kind of pulling it back to eternity and Gore making his decision and the daughter, bringing the daughter back. And then, because I thought, I actually was thinking somehow that Natalie Portman was going to pull through. Mm. So it clearly seems like they did bring her back to sort of redeem her kind of bad rap she got for the first 2 movies, and then kind of, you know, not wanting to do the third one, and then so they really wanted to just bring her back, give her a bow, and then I think, and this was better. I mean, she had a lot more to do in this movie, than she has in the previous ones. She did die from cancer at the end of the movie, and that was pretty poignant. In the whole where they just decided they were going to get back together, they were meant to be together. You know, all this stuff happens. They defeat the enemy, and then no, she's not going to make it. Mm-hmm. And their little sort of interaction at the end, I thought she did a great job there. I thought they both did. So that part was good. And then the wrap up was, you know, kind of a typical Marvel wrap up where we go back to Asgard, we test Valkyrie's back to normal, the kids are okay and they're growing up. Korg grows back his body. And then we see, and I don't know, what was the name of the daughter?
I think they just called her Love at the end. I don't think they ever actually gave her a name.
Yeah. So, yeah, and the whole theme of, you know, love is more, you know, important than revenge and all that stuff. That was, you know, that was okay. But it was like, almost kind of like too little too late.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. Like, I love all of those themes, obviously. And
the wrap up they did was funny with Thor and Love, I guess is her name. You know, now being sort of almost like Guardians of the Galaxy on their own and out fighting and stuff, where they set you up like she was just going to be going to school. One thing I want to point out, and that was Hemsworth's daughter.
Oh yeah, I read that. That's great.
Right? Yeah. The thing is, you know how I was kind of like not very impressed with the actor that played Leia, young Leia in Obi-Wan, and I'm like, when you see this girl and how awesome she was, like giving her dad crap.
She should have played.
She would have been
young
perfect.
Leia.
Like that's who I was. That's who I was. She would have been perfect for young Leia, and that's exactly that sort of just, you know, sauciness that she had is exactly what I thought the actress who played Leia was kind of missing or felt kind of forced.
Right, yeah.
So that was just one thing I thought about because her performance there was pretty funny at the end. Of course, she's got the benefit of she's just hanging out with her dad, so I'm sure that makes it easier.
Right. Yeah, one thing, I have a list of things that I wanted to kind of touch on because there's so much I don't want to say I had problems with it because like kind of to follow up on what you said about Jane's storyline. I actually did, like I said, I think they handled that pretty well. And yeah, the ending was pretty poignant. Valkyrie, unfortunately, I feel like she had some sort of plot, but it was cut out. But that reminds me, didn't they make a big deal about Valkyrie and Jane were going to be a couple at some point? Like in the last, they totally just dropped that completely. I mean, they hinted that you know, she was interested in women and that she talked about her girlfriend and stuff, but that was, I mean, really it.
That was it.
It seemed like she may have even had some other sort of plot to go along with that, but they must have cut it. And I don't know, who knows what sort of studio crap went on behind the scenes that determined that. Right. But that was just something I wanted to bring up because it seemed like I was just bummed that Valkyrie didn't really have a whole lot to do in this movie. That being said, I do think all of the stuff with Jane, like her action sequences and the way she kind of like she was able to fight and stuff, but she was still clunky on her kind of entrances and catchphrases.
Yes, that was funny.
That was funny, and then the way she was able to kind of like fling all the shards of the hammer out and then they would all come back. I thought that was awesome. And then another point...
There's definitely a ton of cool stuff.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff I liked, but it never came together. And it certainly never felt like an epic Marvel adventure. and I'm not sure like what point that was kind of like where that came in. Was it because people were kind of jumping around? Was it there wasn't a whole lot of weight to things because there was a lot of jokes? But it might have been because too. Did you notice that the music was just not, especially compared to Ragnarok, which had that awesome like bloopy '80s kind of retro soundtrack. I did like that there was a little bit of a like heavy metal, hard rock aspect to it, but it didn't feel like they went far enough with it. And I also felt like they overused Guns N' Roses. We should have heard a whole wide variety.
They did. I know
rock music, and it was just all Guns N' Roses.
We got Rainbow in the Dark Dio at the end,
right.
but like, that should have been in the
It
movie.
would have been awesome for them to be in the movie.
Yeah, the soundtrack definitely seemed like more of an afterthought.
But it's interesting because the previous composer was Mark Mothersbaugh, who's the lead singer of Devo. And then this one, I guess, was Michael Giacchino, who he's done a lot of Marvel stuff, but I guess he only supplied the themes, and it was another composer that did the regular music. But that was just something that stood out as kind of strange to me too.
Post-credit scenes. I thought the final post-credit scene where Jane goes to Valhalla. I'm like that. I mean, again, it was pointless. It doesn't. We've come to like rely on these post-credit scenes as the big tease and something that will carry us to what the next adventure is going to be, and a lot of them have been very throwaway or just don't kind of make any sense. So I thought it was nice as a wrap up to Jane's story, that she gets to go to Valhalla. The other post-credit scene, I thought the whole Mount Olympus or wherever the hell they were and Zeus thing was funny but kind of pointless. And then now Hercules, the Marvel Universe's version of Hercules is going to go after Thor. I'm like, okay, how many cans of worms with different like groups of gods and different dimensions? And it seems like every post-credit scene in Multiverse of Madness with Charlize Theron, it's just like, okay, now what's this? Now we're going back to Dormammu's hangout, and that's his daughter or something like that. It's like, how many cans of worms are they going to open when we still don't know where Phase 4 is going? So I guess that's my transition into any final thoughts for you before we get to that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That leads right into what I was going to talk about, starting with the post-credit scenes. It's funny because I feel like the post-credit scenes that we're getting these days are giving us a little bit more in terms of like cameos and big wow factor
fan
moments. Fan service. But whereas like previously in the previous phases, like I remember always being really excited for the post-credit scenes and thinking like, oh, the so-and-so is going to show up, and then it ended up being like, I don't know, just like one-off. Like in Iron Man 3, it's just like quick gag with Mark Ruffalo at the end. That's it. And I remember being kind of disappointed by that and thinking like, they need to show us all these characters. But now that they're finally doing that, it's kind of like, no, either give us something that is meaningful or like just hold back. Because as much as I love Hercules, and I was really excited to see him at the end there because he's one of my favorite comic book characters, it does feel like it's just every single one of these, like with Eternals, it was Harry Styles as Star Fox and these other Eternals, and it's like we don't even know if we're gonna get another Eternals movie. I wonder if there's some sort of greater studio mandate or something that has changed within the past few years where someone is saying like, you have to have 2 teases at the end of the Marvel movies to make sure people are interested. And I did want to point out that Disney did just have a big CEO switch, and I know that the current CEO isn't as well known for his kind of creativity fostering, whereas the previous CEO was a little bit more open to that.
Business guy. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I wonder if that has anything to do with the length of the movies. They've all been just around 2 hours, which kind of seems like that would be less of a creative decision, more of a executive decision. And then these kind of significant but also hollow post-credit scenes that they might be demanding just so they can have threads to set up for Disney Plus or whatever else, you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, like, just to not to spend too much time on post-credit scenes, but like just off the top of my head when I think back to the first three phases. There's the post credit scenes at the end of both Avengers, the first two Avengers film. There's the Wanda and Quicksilver post credit, awesome teasing post credit scene at the end of Winter Soldier. Just like those things come to mind that were just so like, and even Thanos at the end of Ultron saying, "I'll do it myself."
Right.
You know what I mean? Like with the Infinity Gauntlet, like though they were so juicy.
Right.
So many of them, and these all seem like, yes, big cameos, but not really doing anything or helping us see where we're going. So what are your thoughts on what is wrong with, that's a big discussion online, is what's up with Phase 4? Why do we not know where we're going? Why does it seem so discombobulated? And there's a lot more kind of like, with a few exceptions, a lot more hit and miss to both the movies and the shows.
Yeah, well, it's funny you bring that up too, because I was doing a little bit more like browsing of online forums than I have been recently. I mean, I feel like I am not as picky as I used to be when it comes to movies in general. I've really, looking back, I see people trash Black Widow all the time, but I really love that had that great emotional through line with the family story, and the flashback scene at the beginning was awesome. And
I think in retrospect, I liked, there was a couple of moments I thought were goofy in it, but I there was a lot of stuff I understood better, like with Dracoff and stuff the second time around. And especially looking back over the movies that have followed and the shows that have followed, I think Black Widow is actually
probably one of the better
really
ones.
Good. Black Widow's only crime is that it was, because it took place when it did, and because it came out in the middle of the pandemic, even though they waited, it was just because, she's already dead, and then we're doing this movie. But I think that fuels a lot of people's kind of dismissing.
Yeah, I agree.
That film, but I think in the first batch, I think really, to me, Shang-Chi and Black Widow stand out pretty highly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like I said, I've really enjoyed, with the exception of, I guess, this one, I've really enjoyed all the TV shows and movies to a certain extent. I mean, there have been ones that I haven't liked as much, but I think people are being a little bit too harsh. I think we were spoiled with a long run of really great movies that were just really epic in scope.
Right.
And especially with and just to go back to that CEO switch, I almost wonder how much that has to do with it. Like, we're seeing more of and I'm just trying to think, maybe the pandemic has something to do with it too, because that kind of put through all of their plans into the air and that sort of thing. But
I would say too, I think we are seeing a little bit of a sort of recovery plan from the pandemic, and how they've had to shuffle so many things around. It also does make me feel like they're rushing things a little bit, and maybe to them it's like, well, no, these three titles were supposed to come out a year and a half ago, and they're just coming out now, so maybe they feel like they're kind of catching up. But it does feel like the plan is not as well thought out as it was, or again, maybe it's just that they're really scrambling to try to put the pieces back together because the pandemic screwed everything up.
Yeah, I think that seems to be one of the more likely explanations. But I think we're probably, especially now that we're coming out of the pandemic and they're kind of picking up the pieces and back on track now, I think we'll probably, hopefully, see a bit of a increase in quality. Although I'm a little bit skeptical about the next Black Panther movie, just because I really have no idea what they are going to do without Chadwick. Because I love him as Black Panther, and it just seems so strange to try to do anything with that character, or even that setting, because you have to acknowledge it somehow, or what are they going to do with this character? So I'm a little bit skeptical about that. But then Ant-Man is after that, so both the Ant-Man movies have been pretty good. So I wonder, and that is supposedly going to introduce Kang officially as a villain. So hopefully that will leave us with something a little bit more substantial.
Yeah. So definitely some question marks, but I'm totally still on board, and I'm excited for the upcoming shows and films. So, any other final thoughts, Cam?
Actually, yeah, I have one more thought. We've been doing this.
Okay.
This is our longest chat, but there's a lot to say. This is just a total throwaway, random thought, but this movie had probably one of the worst special effects scenes that I've seen in a big budget Hollywood movie, and that's when Heimdall's son, like, communicates to Thor at the very beginning, and he's just like a floating head.
Yeah.
And that looks like something that would have failed a VFX course in my film school. Like, I was shocked at how awful that was, to the point where I wonder if it was intentional. It was like Taika trying to just be silly, because like I feel like if you go back, if you have another chance to watch the movie or that scene again, like,
I will
half
when
of
it comes out on Disney Plus.
I feel like half of his head was like cut off, and it was just like the green screen was really bad, and that effect in general is just not the most convincing. So it just looked really strange to me, and I just want to point that out. But other than that, no, that's it.
Yeah. Not to end on a negative note, but no. Hey, so that's a wrap on Thor: Love and Thunder. All right, next up, we are going to cover the second half of the last 3 episodes of Ms. Marvel, the Disney Plus show, which we enjoyed the first half, not without some reservations, and I feel pretty much the same as we carried through the last 3 episodes overall. I enjoyed them. I think the show, it petered out a little bit for me. Overall, I still enjoyed it. So that's kind of my overall reaction. I really enjoyed it. There were some great elements in the last 3 episodes, but also some things that were a bit kind of puzzling and or just kind of lackluster for me. So that's my overall reaction. Cam, what's yours?
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree. I really enjoyed the first half, and that, like you said, it continued. I think the quality pretty much continued. I really thought this one was like really just well done all across the board. Nothing mind blowing. Not like it pretty much wrapped up exactly how I was expecting it to, with a few things that I thought were surprising and a couple things I thought could have been done a little bit better. But just the music kept being great, and the concept continued to work for me, and just it fleshed out all the right parts of the lore that I thought were, appropriate. It didn't really like muddy the waters like we were saying Thor did. In terms of like the greater MCU, and then it had some really great just relationships between all the different characters, and some great performances, and so just all around really enjoyable, fun MCU adventure. And I will say this really felt like it eventually kind of coalesced into this really epic, even though it wasn't like a huge world-ending situation.
Right.
It still felt like it had a lot of MCU weight to it, and like an epic adventure. So I think it really just kind of ticked off all the boxes and did everything really well. And it was just really fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it for the most part. I thought the effects and the production value throughout was pretty strong. And the fight scenes, while there's always that part of it, like the stakes were obviously not so high here. Although in that sort of final battle in the last episode, they got pretty high where all those civilians could have been really hurt. So all of that was good, but you just still get the feeling like, okay, it's a bunch of kids kind of running around. So I think all of that was great. I love the wrap up. This continued to drive home, family values kind of thing, like. The relationships between the kids and things like that were great, and the parents, and all of that was good. I'll just tick through a couple of things that threw me off a little bit. In episode 4, I loved the whole teaser at the end of episode 3, and then we're going to Pakistan, and then they go to Pakistan and meet the grandmother and all the family out there. I thought that was great. When she meets that little sort of version of it's almost like the Red Hand, reminded me of from
Daredevil. Oh yeah.
But meet those folks, find out what's going on and with the clandestines and that they can't let them open up the veil and all that. So that I thought episode 4 was really solid. Episode 5 was a little off for me. We spent a lot of time in the past with that sort of backstory, and I just felt like kind of killed the momentum of what was happening back in New Jersey, and the way the finale came together with all of the sort of other, like Kamala's best friend there kind of coming back into the picture, the random TikTok girl, from school, and then her brother. Like, we spent so much time in the past, and then that whole thing where, oh boy, it turns out that Kamala was the thing dancing through the stars that say that, that allowed her grandmother to find her way back to her father and everything else. Like, we've seen that done, where, somebody, some son or daughter or something ends up being, even that recent movie with Deadpool there, his sci-fi movie on Netflix. We've seen that trope done before, and at the end, so it was like, okay, I kind of saw it coming in episode 5. Oh, it's going to turn out that Kamala was the thing that saved her grandmother, but I was kind of like, well, so what? Like, it didn't really. It was almost like they were. Whoever the writers were, the producers were just really excited to use that trope and have that turn out to be. And I guess it allowed them to shed more light on the the circumstances that were going on when Pakistan was created and all that stuff. But it just didn't seem to really add to anything. Like when she came back, and then we picked back up with the story of Aisha and her being bad and everything else. But like when we got to the finale. And it's kind of like, okay, it's going to be this kid save the day, and the whole thing that they did in the high school with setting up all the traps for damage control and everything else, that all felt, and her brother coming in, and like they had their little sort of, heist team together. It kind of, like, I would have loved for them to have spent more time building that up and making that happen more sort of organically and incrementally, as opposed to spending as much time as we did with these kind of weird time travel flashbacks. So that, to me, was one of the only things that I didn't like, and it made the finale kind of feel a little bit rushed. But overall, yeah, enjoyable. And it almost kind of brings me back to that whole kind of thing of like, things do sort of feel a little bit rushed with the Disney Plus shows, and I think kind of across Star Wars and Marvel, and then maybe with the MCU, the way they wrapped it up. But they wrapped it up great. And, what did you think of the reveal of her actually being now potentially the first mutant in the MCU, as opposed to being an Inhuman?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think I kind of I was glad that they did that, because I kind of hope that they. I almost am hoping that they coalesce mutants and Inhumans into one sort of thing. Like, not necessarily, like, I still think they're going to be two separate factions, but they've always seemed like such a similar concept to me, even though one's from space and one's like here on Earth, but they're pretty much the same concept otherwise, that to me it seems like they're purposefully making her a mutant so they can also tie it into Inhumans and say, oh, she's an Inhuman because those are kind of this offshoot of mutants from space kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah,
so that's kind of how I saw it. So I thought that was kind of a clever way to tie it back in. But, I mean, it was more of just a throwaway line more than anything.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people online were making it, oh, see, here we go. Now the X-Men are teed up in the MCU. And one thing I thought about the finale too that was interesting, that final battle, is they also made her use her big stretchy hands. Even though her powers are different, her energy stuff took the form of her having the big hands that she has in the comic books much more. I feel like that was to try to kind of like make it up to the fans that were not happy that her power set got changed so much.
Yeah, I see. To me, it didn't even seem like they changed her. Like, obviously, they did change her power set, but ultimately, she has all of the same kind of like abilities that she does.
Right.
If she's stretchy, it's just a different way of showing it visually. So, I mean, and they were already using the big hands in the first few episodes, so that seemed to me like a pretty direct reference. So, and like I said in the last episode, I never had a huge issue with the changes that they made, and I actually think,
yeah, no, I don't.
in the context of the MCU, they're better. Like, it would have been weird to try to make it exactly a 1-to-1 recreation of the comics.
Right. That's why Hawkeye doesn't have that stupid flappy eyepiece,
right?
In the MCU, because it just doesn't work visually.
Yeah, I have to say I really enjoyed that flashback in the time travel. I mean, I really love I remember that movie Predestination with Ethan Hawke, where he goes. I love any time travel loop movies. I love that kind of stuff. So that kind of hit a particular nerve for me. And I also, one of the big redeeming things for a lot of these MCU movies is when they show either like historical or other things in their kind of visual style. So I really love that how all the set decor and visuals of the previous time there, period, which was really cool. But I will say I almost forgot to watch the last episode because it felt like the 5th episode was a wrap up of so much. It was kind of a wrap up, yeah. And then I realized, oh wait, there's still this whole other like plot, and so the 6th episode did feel a little bit tacked on, and I definitely felt like that whole heist trap, setting up the traps, as much as I loved that, it was very rushed. And then that TikTok girl just kind of appears out of nowhere, and then like 2 seconds later, the brother does the same thing and just appears out of nowhere. So I do agree with that. But and the one other problem I had with that episode was they kind of just brought in that evil girl, that evil like kind of comically evil. Damage control woman in place of the guy, because I feel like that guy is probably going to end up being more of a Coulson character in the future. So they needed some other kind of villain to take his role for that last episode. So a little falter at the end there, but it worked for me overall. And the one thing I did want to say before we wrap up here is I was kind of confused about the post-credit scene, because I had seen I had seen that Brie Larson was going to be in it, so I was like, oh, they're going to have an awesome scene where they meet up and everything. But then almost like Spider-Man, almost like like No Way Home. Peter Parker and Tony Stark when they first meet. That too. But yeah, she just ends up. I couldn't tell. Did she teleport to Earth, or did Kamala actually? Because one of Kamala's powers in the comics is that she can transform. She can like it's part of her stretchy powers where she can disguise herself as someone else. So I wasn't sure if that's what that was implying, or if she actually like teleported and then Kamala is like somewhere on the other side of the universe or something, you know?
Yes, I didn't get that. I think it probably was purposely vague. Right, yeah. But yeah, she swishes out of there and gets thrown into the closet, and then it's Carol Danvers who comes out, Brie Larson. And I was almost like, oh yeah, I remember you telling me that she can, that she disguised herself as Carol Danvers at one point in the comics or whatever it was. But then when Brie Larson said something, she had one little line that I didn't really catch exactly what she said. But when she was, so I thought, okay, maybe this is just Kamala and she's transformed into a version of Carol. But then when they spent a lot of time showing her look around the room and see all the pictures of herself and being like, what's going on? So that made me think it is Carol Danvers.
I had the same reaction.
So so I think the historical stuff was good, and that whole using that, oh, you were the one that saved the day in the past thing, it's a cool trope, but to me, they spent a lot of time building up to that, and it really didn't like push forward the overall narrative of the show, and I think the finale suffered from that. And that just brings up one other point I wanted to make is it's like, WandaVision was 9 episodes and Loki was, I think, at least 8, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was somewhere in the middle. It was longer than 6, I think.
Yeah, but like, so I don't know what it is with, and especially where they're keeping, in some of the shows like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, maybe if that's the one I'm thinking of. Was 6 episodes, but some were longer than others, and some were, almost a full hour. Where both Ms. Marvel and Moon Knight, the episodes were pretty brief, uniformly. And I'm like, why are we stuck on 6 episodes? I mean, definitely Moon Knight, and maybe to a degree this, if they wanted to have this, the whole flashback time loop thing. If this had been an episode longer, maybe they could have done that and had the back in New Jersey plot wrap up and feel a lot more kind of like have time to sort of set that up
right
in a much more believable way. But overall, yeah, I thought this was definitely solid. I think she's a great character.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely looking forward to seeing her more in the so like, do I want a season 2 of Miss Marvel, or am I just excited to see Ms. Marvel on the big screen, interacting with other heroes? And I would say I'm definitely much more excited for to see her become part of the Avengers and interact with than I am to see another season of this show. But yeah, overall I thought this was really good. Yeah, so that's a wrap on Ms. Marvel. Very excited for She-Hulk. I have a feeling I love Tatiana Maslany. Orphan Black is one of my favorite shows of the last several years. So really excited to see how that goes. Being a more almost kind of like a sitcom kind of thing, and with
with Mark Ruffalo.
Mark Ruffalo, yeah, being in it. So excited for that. We will be back very soon with Stranger Things, and we're also going to take a look at the horror film Black Phone. So exciting stuff for us. We are excited to talk to you. If you are listening to us and enjoying our content, please do, wherever you're listening to us. If you can give us a like, certainly follow us if you're not following us, leave a comment. And Cam and I are both on Twitter, and we post our episode links out on Twitter when we post a new episode, so feel free to leave a comment there and let us know your thoughts. But thanks so much, guys, and we'll be back soon.
See you on the next one, guys.